Hi, my name is Jaydeep Korde. I am going to talk today about the cloud governance problem that we, eSynergy, have been working with big enterprise clients and governments to resolve. And really to sort of work through that challenge of engineering teams wanting to embrace the public cloud and the paradigm shift it facilitates in terms of what you can build and how quickly you can do it, with the challenge of organizations, governance and siloed structure. That means actually what you do in terms of getting software into production is as much about governance and the change process as it is about what the art of the possible is. And that contradiction and how we've overcome it and what the patterns that we've seen be successful are is what this pattern, what this is about. And really focusing on that governance piece rather than the engineering piece in some ways is where the value comes from. So what we're going to cover today is a little bit about who eSynergy Solutions are. I think that thinking about the cloud governance problem and what's happening right now with COVID-19, I think it could have changed everything. And we will see that over the coming months. But I think we'll talk a little bit about why that might be. And then the meat of what we're really going to discuss is how we've gone about in organizations getting a governance pattern established for cloud services for the enterprise that within a given context scale, and that are available for the whole organization, and a way to use public cloud, both for global businesses and organizations that are very, very large and very, very complex. Talk a little bit about the idea of, the PaaS and what the typical attempted patterns that people try and create around that are, as a standardized development environment for people to go about and do what they need to do, and the merits of doing that and not doing that. And also we're going to talk a little bit about how we try and avoid engineering going rogue, as I call it. If there's anything that seems outrageous on that list of what we're going to cover, and you thought it was going to be something else, then please tell me now. For the purposes of transparency, this is a recording because I'm having bandwidth issues, but I am actually on the call and we'll be taking questions afterwards via audio. So yeah, sorry if this feels that I'm not listening. It's just a function of needing to get a high quality copy out to everybody. So moving on. Who am I? I'm Jaydeep. I'm an engineer and investor who's passionate and care a lot about trying to put useful working software into production in lots of different organizations, both very, very large, very, very small. Tend to lead engineering teams and programs in financial institutions and government to try and embrace public cloud in one way or another and use microservice development patterns. More interestingly, who are eSynergy? Well, we're an organization that is disrupting the consultancy model a little bit. And we're doing that by springing up teams as a service, or small cross-functional teams that basically are sourced from our communities that we've cultivated over 15 years through sponsoring different events and building different meetups, to supply teams, ready-formed teams that have worked together before, that reuse code, people and processes to get organizations' outcomes delivered much faster, normally in the form of useful working software, and largely trying to leverage public cloud in doing that. And I think that we work with a lot of different organizations that simple and common characteristics is their largeness and their complexity. I think COVID-19 has changed everything, and how public cloud might be used in the enterprise is not off the list. Remote working is now the only way to work, and public cloud is facilitating that as never before, as organizations try and reflect how they're going to be effective with development teams, trying to do really complex stuff and working across multiple silos in light of the desire to have small autonomous teams that can deliver useful business value through software and production. I think that the tailwinds are behind adoption of public cloud in a way that they haven't been before. And what we're going to talk about is what we've seen work in a pre-COVID-19 world. I think what's going to work in a post-COVID-19 world is something we're all going to learn about in the next 12 months. And I'm sure in the question section, my question to you would be, what are you already seeing in that space? So whilst acknowledging that, we're going to now move to what we know and what we've done. And really, I think it starts with the idea of how do you build a cloud governance pattern, not why and how can we use public cloud as from a technology perspective to do something much faster. There are almost an infinite number of use cases for that. But our challenge is we work in big, complex, siloed organizations that are not perfect and that have legacy. And how do we work with governance that, rightly or wrongly, shapes so much of how we do development? And in our experience there, we've learned, the things that work and the things that don't work. And in that, we'll talk a little bit about the things that you should definitely not do. Then I think there's this body of stuff that you need to do and think about, and that's the sort of technical meat of it, and some strategy that needs to be thought about. But what I'm really keen to emphasize is that technical thinking and strategy isn't going to be what gets you over the line. What gets you over the line is the ability to be small and specific. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I think what I'd also like to start with is what I would class as the important non-intuitive things that end up seeing you into production and what we've consistently seen work in that context. And it's non-intuitive, I think, because it starts with buying cake for people who you as perhaps an engineering team find your examiner and marker and the team and function that slows you down in the form of governance, and saying, look, we'd like to do something in the form of a project or a product team that avoids using the word public cloud, but talks about the benefits and the use case of what using the cloud services that you want to use gives you. Even if it's a technical benefit, not a business one, i.e. faster test environments, but framing the project around governance and around the change function in your organization and talking about the business benefits will inherently be beneficial for you and allow you to get some success in our experience. If you start talking about it as, I want EC2 instances, I want to use S3 buckets, it doesn't really work. And that's not to say you won't need S3 buckets or EC2 instances. It's just that by framing it in that way, the idea you're going to have a use case for those systems or those services that will be able to scale in your organization is a bit false. You've got to think about your pattern in terms of really specific terms, and frame it persistently in terms of the benefits, not the technology. You have to give all the credit, emotional ownership to the governance team and the service transition folks, or the service now people, not your engineering teams. And this is really, really important. And as leaders and people who run these programs and are trying to push the boundaries on this is really important. What you want to think about is establishing a pattern that others can use, but you want to avoid thinking you can create a generic service capability. And that's really important, because the specificness of the pattern that's usable by others is more important than a generic service capability. You've got to also be able to swallow some of the technical and business contradictions in this approach, because what I've seen effective and what we try and do is some human engineering that does the basic stuff of bringing people together to try and allow to swallow a risk profile for trying something new and learning about something new for some really tangible benefits that everyone can get excited about. As an engineering team, your native understanding of the benefits and what you're trying to do are sadly, and there's no point pretending this, is they're totally directly oppositely connected to what, or facing what your governance folks are trying to do. Governance folks are trying to avoid you ending on the front pages of the newspaper due to outages, leaks, problems, high profile things that essentially they're trying to stop. And they try and stop that by limiting change, because change is where risk gets introduced. Now, as an engineering team, you're thinking, this is nuts. There's so much more we can do if we embrace public cloud. And my challenge is that contradiction and two teams with opposite goals is where I'm talking about our patterns being useful. If you're a Spotify, if you're Google, or if you're Facebook, I think you've got different problems, and I would tap out now. But if you're not one of those organizations, if you have size, if you have complexity, if you have silos and you have dysfunction, then this is what we've seen work. And banks, defense contractors, governments, insurance businesses, and asset managers can be a classic example of this, in part because of the listed and regulated nature of the entities that they are. If you're Spotify, then sorry for wasting time. Do not be unspecific. It doesn't work when you try and say, here are multiple decision trees you have to jump through, and then we'll allow you to use, whatever particular service it is that you're trying to get your hands on in prod. It doesn't work. And that's why so often, centralized initiatives from technology, be it CTO's office or CTO-like functions to try and push public cloud, end up not seeing scaled use of public cloud services and ecosystems and tools. It doesn't work. And that lack of specificity is the problem, because it makes it very difficult for you as your organization, dysfunctional as potentially it may be, to absorb the change and risk that's being talked about. Whereas the smaller you are, the more specific you are, the easier it is for your organization to get a handle and start learning and building and getting an emotional cadence with this new paradigm shift that is public cloud. I'll take some questions on this do not bit at the end, I hope, in terms of don't be unspecific, because I'm being unspecific about what do you mean by being unspecific? But I think the idea of generic ecosystem, public cloud ecosystem tools, trying to make them available to your organization for totally very different use cases, different business units, different areas, it doesn't work. And that isn't that it shouldn't work, it's just that it hasn't worked to date. And there's another model that sort of does. I think whilst I'm talking about the heuristics and the human bit around what you can do to be successful, I think there's some thinking that as engineering teams we need to definitely have done. And automation at the governance, automation and governance at the cloud services layer is vital. And what we mean by this is cloud services governance is a general term that refers to the process of applying specific policies or principles to the use of cloud computing services or APIs, sort of full stop. But then we get to this challenge of by starting and thinking really small, we can start having good answers to questions like, how are we going to start encircling services and applications with configurable policies, and how will the policies be centrally controlled and versioned? We can, again, by starting small, we can start thinking about how we pick tools. And again, this sits with a fair bit of complexity, because, the art of picking the tools is we're matching, our logical approach to a physical set of tools, and perhaps far more tools than you thought you needed, considering that no cloud service or resource governance tool does everything. And then we start thinking about these trade-offs, that need to be considered before coming up with, your first instances of what's going to be your cloud governance tooling. You need to think about the data. And this is a massive deal. And again, by being specific and small, this problem becomes broken down and is manageable. By being too wide and outside of a specific business case or use case, your problem's just too big, I think, and too complex. The data exists decoupled, and there's got to be governed by itself, but it's also then got to be bound to applications and governed in that context of being bounded. Yeah, a biggie, and we see lots of pain with that. If you're automating the development process, and you really should be, and have got tools to deal with development and testing and integration and deployment, cloud governance needs to be part of that. And the basic path here is to build governance checks into the entire DevOps process, as well as the automated tools, much like we do with, and we think about in terms of security. So that it needs to touch each part of the process and become systematic to everything that you're doing. And again, how do you make this work? You start small. You think about it in the context of a specific use case where you're going to be using public cloud and a business unit that's going to be doing it, not thinking about your entire organization. Cloud data governance. Yeah. We'll come on to that next. Data is, as this slide says, it's ugly, and it does represent another layer, and it's governed with service governance tools in some cases, and with resource governance tools in other cases. I think you've really, core to this is thinking about governing cloud-based data storage, including databases, paying attention to schemas and the ability to deal with applications and services that leverage which parts of the data. Because without doing this, you're going to struggle. And I think it's really important to think about this in terms of considering that a change to a structured or unstructured database can take down an application. What written policies are you going to have to contend with changes to the database as well as changes to the applications? Everything's got to be tracked and versioned and configurations managed. Not impossible, it's not an impossible problem to solve, but again, you've got to be really small and specific to make this manageable and for your governance folks to buy it and get into it and feel that they've got control and ownership. The data needs to be governed as well beyond the schema. This means that you're tracking the data itself and placing policies that deal with content, including restrictions on what can be entered into a database, frequency of updates, and the use of database resources. Tracking the data itself ensures that the service and applications that leverage the data or database are doing so within the guidelines that are set by developers or admins. This ideally keeps bad things from happening. And an example of that is databases becoming saturated, but there are other bad things that can happen. And again, by thinking about it in a small use case and instance, you can think about those bad things and try and manage them and get the buy-in that you're not being too risky. To PaaS or not to PaaS? In terms of adopting public cloud, what a lot of people have tried to do, and we see this consistently, is let's give a platform as a service to our developers all across the world, potentially, that constitutes a standardized development environment, which we've controlled and centrally managed, and then they can do whatever they want to go and do. Does this solve and give you the answer to the benefits of public cloud and a naturally integrated governance approach? And do we see this being massively effective? Yes and no. I don't think that PaaSes are a waste of time at all. I think they're really powerful tools that can help. But I don't think necessarily you're going to have one PaaS to rule them all, nor do I think that you can necessarily have a centralized PaaS that works and is controlled centrally, that manages that gets managed for everyone. I think that understanding the full end case for a specific team, type of application and platform that's being built is really important. Again, because we're not talking about what we want to do from an engineering perspective, we want to allow governance and change to be able to swallow it. this. So being super specific about what is going to be deployed onto this PaaS and what that CI/CD pipeline looks like connecting to it is really important. I think in different business instances and in super secure situations, the level of isolation you need could mean that you need multiple PaaSes, even within a team. And there are some instances where that has made sense. We see that working. But then with multiple PaaSes, there are multiple problems. And again, the data problem around that is not insignificant. So by being small and being specific, you can think about your data problem and how that constitutes a pattern, whereby others who have perhaps a different data problem have got to do something different. But if that data problem matches and works, then perhaps this is a solution. Do you run your own PaaS? Do you take it as a service? I think the answer, again, if you can be really small and really specific, the potential ability to take it as a service makes your life easier, and taking that service through the form of a public cloud makes your job of running the PaaS easier compared to running it on your own tin. Fundamental to effective use of PaaS and the different options, be it PCF, be it Mesos, be it OpenShift, is that you've got a usage pattern that's got limits. You're not saying it's for every microservice and it's for every team. You're saying it's for this team doing this kind of work for these applications in this instance. And again, I'm not talking about dev, I'm talking about going to prod. And that's what we care about. We care about going to prod. Okay, there's another road. And the other road is that you as an engineering team go rogue because you built something so exciting, the business is really keen for it, and they're willing to swallow the risk and you can get to live. I don't think that's a great idea, because I think that what it ends up meaning is it ends up slowing your overall organization's ability to use public cloud and for the learning to happen incrementally. Because even if you're going rogue and doing it alone, you're going to be getting things wrong. You're going to be learning how to manage your public cloud plane and ensure you're secure, ensure that you're doing the right things. And doing that as an organization in a collaborative sense where you're all learning and building is better than just running off and doing it on your own. Now, I've been very sympathetic to governance and to the change process and the challenges that represents, not in this instance reflecting the very real fact that I don't think public cloud is a thing that you may or may not use over 5-10 years. It's going to be de facto standard. But that change, just because it's going to be that way, and everyone talks about the idea, and I've been using cloud and working in cloud computing for a long time. Just as you don't have an electricity department, you're not going to have any on-prem infrastructure. Is true, but it doesn't mean that change is easy for an organization. And simply put, if you want to go to prod in your siloed, dysfunctional organization today, you're better off and faster working with your governance people, getting the donuts in, trying to build a use case and build a small specific pattern that you can go with, rather than throwing, or thinking you're too clever and they're too stupid. And now on to that, I think it's really important, and it is the job of engineering teams to try and work collaboratively and build a learning and a path to learn and work with use cases, with governance, rather than try and just circumvent them. And the skill sets involved in great engineering teams, and the skill sets involved in good and well-functioning governance around the software development lifecycle means that it's the job of leaders to try and bring that team and that working together about, and to move away the credit and the emotional ownership of it being about public cloud and technology through to it being about business benefits that governance and change folks are trying to facilitate. And I think if you go rogue and you go with something that's ungoverned and it doesn't sit inside your compliance, ultimately you've got to often end up connecting back to systems that aren't doing and using your cool, ungoverned plane, and that ends up being then problematic, political, expensive, and more expensive. So, I would say there are some real downsides of going rogue, and building these specific patterns, and starting small is a much better way to do it. That's it from me. The webinar pre-recorded, as it were, ends there, and I'm available in real time now to answer them. Thanks very much for your time.